So welcome and everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Dawn's second webinar on gender impact of China's global engagement in the Global South. My name is Cai Yiping, Executive Committee member of Dawn. Dawn stands for Development Alternatives with Women for New Era. Dawn was founded in 1984. We're going to commemorate our 40 years an organization, the 40 years anniversary. This Dawn is a network of feminist scholars, researchers, and activists from the economic South working for the economic and gender justice and sustainable and democratic development. I will be moderate for this webinar. I've been working with Dawn for more than 10 years now. I currently co-lead Dawn's Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights Thematic Analysis team together with Annita Montoute. Before I joined Dawn, I worked with the Manila-based Southern Feminist Organization and also worked in China as associate researcher at Women's Study Institute of China and was a journalist for China Women's News for 10 years. Before we start, I would like to share some important information. So this webinar will be recorded for documentation purpose and will live tweet on social media. If you have any questions, please use the chat box for posting your questions and share your comments. And we're looking forward to the very inspiring presentation, the commentation, as well as your contribution in the discussion. So very welcome again. Before we start, I just gave you some very brief introduction about this research and how this research leads us to this webinar and the objective of the webinar, of course. If you have attended the first Dawn webinar that's held last October, you are probably already familiar with the Dawn's research project. The recording of the first webinar is available on Dawn YouTube channel. My colleague will post the link in the chat box for your information. So this project is propelled by China's expanded global influence, especially in the past decade, through the Belt and Road Initiative, which just celebrated its 10 years anniversary, and its increasing finance for development and active role in the global governance, including in the multilateral mechanisms such as the UN. However, not enough attention has been paid to the gender aspects of China's global engagement. Meanwhile, we can see the paradox between the Chinese government official position and the official documents on the international development cooperation that has a language included that's supporting gender equality, women's development, especially within the South-South cooperation framework, and the lack of the operational guidelines and weakness in the implementation of this, the development cooperation programs and fulfill this commitment. Therefore, in 2022, Dawn launched this project in collaboration with the researchers from the various regions of the Global South, Africa, Asia, Pacific, Latin America, and Caribbean, to conduct exploratory research. So this research began with the development of an analytical framework that outlined the trajectory of China's global engagement in the last half century and identified the key research questions, which these 8 case studies that further explore. At the Southern Feminist Network, Dawn strongly believed that the perspectives and experience of women from the Global South should be placed at the center of this analysis, which is only possible through dialogue, collaboration, and solidarity. So each case study explore one or more of the following questions from a regional or country context. So number one, what role does gender play in China's global engagement? How do Chinese investment or aid projects influence gender equality, women's life, and their human rights in the local communities and local context? The third one is, as a new actor, do China overseas investment and development programs differ from those of traditional donors or investors in terms of the gender policy, gender-related impact assessment? If so, how? If not, why? The first question the general question is how do Southern feminists and social movement strengthen women's rights and gender equality and obtain the social and environmental justice in the face of potentially adverse impacts of Chinese foreign aid and investment. So each case study, which you're going to listen 4 of them, has examined the profound and multidimensional implications of China's global engagement and how in the global south and how various actors, including the state, business sectors, civil societies, and local communities, especially feminist group and women's in the community, react to this. So based on this research, so we organized 2 webinars. So this is the second webinar. So here we will have 4 case studies being shared, and we hope to generate some very interesting and thought-provoking discussion. So the webinar will start with the 4 researchers to present their research, then we're followed by the 3 commentators to share their reflection and comments. And then we open the floor for discussion. So, so that is the program of the webinar. So without further ado, let me invite the first speaker, Dr. Annita Montoute. She is a lecturer in the area of international organization, global governance and multilateralism at Institute of International Relations, the University of the West Indies, Trinidad and Tobago. Her main research interests are civil society, the Caribbean, external relations, and emerging powers. So Annita, the floor is yours, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm pleased to be presenting our research, our paper. The topic is the impact of Chinese development cooperation on women in Trinidad and Tobago, and we are focusing on a hospital and industrial park. And I'm pleased to say that I'm presenting on my behalf and my 2 co-authors, Dr. Jacqueline LaGuardia Martinez and Dr. Deborah McPhee. So I will start with the outline of the presentation, where I will look at the introduction, research question, a research problem and research question. Then I move to the conceptual framework, the methodology. Then I'll do the analysis of the case studies, and I end with conclusion and recommendations. In terms of the introduction and research problem, much of the growing research on China's presence in the Caribbean prioritize economic and trade relations. To a large extent, there is gender blindness and bias in the scholarly literature and by extension in policy debates and practice relating to China-Caribbean engagement. This study attempts to fill this gap by examining women in Chinese development cooperation in the Caribbean via the cases of the ETEC Phoenix Park Industrial Estate and the Couva Hospital in Trinidad and Tobago. To explore this particular phenomenon, we pose the following broad guiding question as follows. What are the impacts of Chinese development cooperation projects on women? That is, how does Chinese development cooperation empower or disempower women in the Caribbean context? Of course, through our case study in Trinidad and Tobago of those 2 initiatives that were developed, created, designed with Chinese financing. For our conceptual framework, we looked at a set of tools or ideas or concepts that would help us explore our topic. So for the purpose of this paper, it is recognized that women's rights are an integral and indivisible part of universal human rights. The protection of such rights requires specific and targeted approaches to economic development that make room for the peculiarity of women's economic, political, and social positionings. The process through which we seek to analyze the place of women is largely informed by Caribbean postmodernist theorizing, of which third world feminism is a part. Third world feminism is not focused exclusively on the idea that all women are oppressed by men. In fact, men can be possible allies, but it also looks at imperialism and global inequities as could be essential drivers of the oppression faced by women. While the region recognizes the opportunity presented to some men and women by globalization, planning and public policy making is increasingly called upon to simultaneously weigh the possible loss of livelihood, employment, and business for others. The high level of female headedness among households in the Caribbean and the sustained higher levels of unemployment among regional women are foundational to how we understand and map the impact of Chinese presence on Caribbean women. The movement of Chinese capital into the Caribbean could result in increased economic inequality, with a wide cross-section of regional women bearing the brunt of the social and economic fallout. In terms of methodology, we followed a strictly qualitative approach, which consists of in-depth description analysis of two cases, as I mentioned before, the Phoenix Park Industrial Estate and the Couva Hospital in Trinidad and Tobago, and we utilized a variety of data collection tools for triangulation, including desk review of various sources, from policy briefs to academic and scholarly papers, and as well as semi-structured interviews. Now, moving on to the case studies and the analysis of the two case studies. In both cases, we found that no consultations were held with women or women's organizations in the design and the implementation of those projects. And we know for empowering any sector, they need to be involved and they need to have ownership of the process. So we thought that it was very instructive that no consultations were held with women or women organizations particularly. In the case of the Couva Hospital, public consultations were held, one on the construction design and infrastructure and the development elements of the project, and the other on the services to be provided by the hospital, but it was with some general groups. It was not specifically targeted at women. One interview revealed that the society in general is considered as beneficiaries of the hospital. So the view is that we consult everybody, and if women are part of it, then we are covering women. However, women are particularly, the interviewee said that women are particularly benefiting by virtue of the provision of breast cancer equipment, that is referring to the Couva Hospital, a training facility for nurses, most of which are women. Going forward, the interviewee felt that digital construction technology promises to give more women the opportunity to work in the construction sector. For the ETech Industrial Park, a feasibility study was conducted for the project. The objective of this study was to understand the viability of the project towards the development of Trinidad and Tobago's physical infrastructure in the non-energy sector. In terms of consultation for the industrial park, only communities in close proximity to the park were targeted because it was felt they would be the most severely impacted by its construction and operations. The objectives of the community consultations were to address their concern and to determine their needs and demands. This consultation showed that residents were concerned about land tenure for those who were occupying state lands illegally, health, safety, and security, environmental risks such as dust during the construction, and gaining employment in the industrial park. An interviewee stated that during the consultation, some women indicated interest in establishing business in the industrial estate. However, as the project is still ongoing, he said, some of the outcomes of the consultations have not materialized. Interviewees stated that thus far the project has generated employment opportunities for both men and women in administrative, engineering, and construction fields, and that many technical personnel in the project are women. It is also believed that once businesses begin their operations at the park, there will be further employment opportunities opening up for residents in the fence-line and wider communities, including women. The implementing agency states that in support of any project, which provides an enabling environment for women empowerment and equal opportunity. The construction company envisages that women will be able to benefit from the industrial park itself via an employment from investment which will come to the park. 10 Chinese investors already confirmed and are operating in the industrial estate. One is producing luggage, he said. And according to the Chinese construction firm, this company is being encouraged to employ women. Another firm will be producing women's sanitary products. This business is likely to employ female workers. Other businesses in line to set up companies include supermarkets, both of which have a significant number of women employees. Additionally, the construction firm asserts that although there are no concessions for women, this sector of the population is welcome to invest either by buying land or leasing factory shells for their businesses. Women who own small businesses may benefit from the smaller lots which are available. It was stated that women will be encouraged to work in operations as well as be trained in the manufactured companies in the industrial estate. What is significant from what I have said there is that these are things that, just came up after the fact. These things were not in the design and in the creation stage. It was not thought out and it was not strategically designed that way. These are things that came up along the way in a very ad hoc and not a targeted and a deliberate attempt to focus on women, find out what their needs are, and in the design and implementation of the project, focus on them. And as you would see in that slide, or one of the slide following, that these pronouncements are not substantiated in terms of we support the empowerment of women. Where is the evidence that you have actually done that without it being specified in a document that spells out clearly that this is your intention to do so, and to do so in a very practical way. So we can move on to the next slide, which continues the case studies, the analysis of the case study. So we, the authors, assert that the ETEC Phoenix Industrial Park is designed to provide technological infrastructure and real estate for businesses operating in the manufacturing and assembly industry, is removed from the activism of civil society organizations involved with issues of women. The analysis of the impact of these two Chinese development cooperation projects on women executed in Trinidad and Tobago shows limited involvement of civil society organizations and activism dealing with women's issues. Although a gender audit of persons administrating and working in the delivery of PAC services display a significant number of women, the business focus of the PAC is historically not in the sectors in which women traditionally operate. No business focus was identified in sectors in which women traditionally operate. They did not make a gender needs or impact analysis or think about the needs of women specifically in designing the project. That is referring to the PAC. The gender needs as they relate to the dual roles of care and work for Caribbean women within the workplace were not part of the planning around those two cases. The research does not establish a clear correlation between the employment of women and the movement of Chinese capital into the country, particularly in the case of the industrial park. This project has not targeted women employment specifically. While there are spaces for small and micro enterprises, as the interviewee said, this did not emerge out of a deliberate strategy, nor was it part of the procurement process to attract businesses owned and operated by women or for possibilities for women entrepreneurship. It is reported that the employer and the contractor followed the procurement regulation and laws of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as the individual contractual obligations, which did not specifically reference the promotion of women entrepreneurship in the venture. Now, in the case of the Couva Hospital, it is clear that women benefited tremendously by the very nature of the project. It's a hospital, so various services are offered, many of which are in high demand by women and children. The nursing training facility that is housed at the hospital is accessed by women, disproportionately by the fact that the nursing profession is female dominated. China has launched projects that address housing, water supply, healthcare, education provision of basic public services, building infrastructure in rural areas, among others. The findings show that because the workers in the two projects were predominantly male, as such, general services such as clean water, washroom facilities were provided for everyone, of which women by chance happen to benefit. There are no provisions for equity in pay between men and women or daycare facilities for working mothers on site to enhance the working conditions of female workers. Now, by way of conclusion, considering the research results—
Please wrap up, Annita, quickly.
Okay. Thank you. Considering the research results, we consider that beyond China's positions in favor of gender equity, women empowerment, and agency, there is need to transfer this to the international development cooperation strategy. I think the first suggestion is for China to practice gender mainstreaming. But the point I want to end on is that in all of this, while we have all these recommendations towards China, we want to say that we have to position the Caribbean as active agents with the ability to influence and to shape the interaction, the engagement with China. Because we do not want them to be seen as passive agents just receiving it with no power to do it. And so the sensitivity and the awareness to empower women has to start from the national level. So when countries are engaging with external partners, including China, they can be part of the process and actively engaging and have the agency to exercise, change, and influence policies and initiatives to empower women through those projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Annita, for the such rich and comprehensive presentation. Actually, you're covering two cases, not only one.
Yeah,
so it's legitimate to give you some more time. And our next speaker is Zinzile Fengu. Zinzile is an independent researcher from Zimbabwe. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Language and Communication and a master degree in development studies. She has worked in the human rights sectors for over 12 years, and her current study for PhD in development studies and her thesis work is focusing on feminist organizing in Zimbabwe. Now the floor is yours, Zinzile. You have 10 minutes.
Evening. Afternoon, morning, evening, everyone. I'm presenting on behalf of myself and my fellow researcher, Dr. Hibis Kasa. And our research is on gender and environmental impacts of China's Bikita lithium mining in Zimbabwe. Next slide, please. Okay. So basically, our premise on the background is that Zimbabwe's indigenization policies seek to redress the injustices that were created by colonialism and to liberalize the economy. And following Zimbabwe's being sanctioned by the European Union, it then led to Zimbabwe then pursuing an independent development path with China, which seeks to achieve meaningful development outcomes. And this was mainly fostered by the similarities in history between the two nation states. Whilst this has had some notable impacts on the general fiscus and the state of the Zimbabwean economy, there is there are large gaps and a lot of jarring injustices that can be seen when it comes to gender inequalities and injustices, and that is the background of our study. Next slide, please. So our research questions were, as a new actor, do China's overseas investments and development programs differ from those of traditional donors or investors in terms of gender policies and gender-related impact assessments? If so, how? If not, why? And also, how do Southern feminists and social movements strengthen women's rights and gender equality and obtain social and environmental justice in the face of potential adverse impacts of Chinese foreign aid and investment? Our study was purely qualitative, and we used the participatory method of research. Data was primarily collected in focus group discussions, and from the focus groups, we're able to then draw out individuals who had experiences that were key to answering our questions, and we then snowballed those. We also did desktop reviews of policy, legislative, and investment issues, as well as the demographic information, so as to clearly understand the changes that have taken place. So our main research findings were that women's livelihoods have been gravely affected by the mining activities. There's a lot of open pits that have been left uncovered, which have posed great threats to livestock, to human beings, to children who are going to school. And because the big corporations have then subcontracted artisanal mining, we have had incidences where agricultural plots have been taken from the women within the communities in a targeted way. The widows, the female-headed household were always the first to lose their agricultural plots. And that has had adverse impacts on the women in these communities who are already food insecure. So the previous owners of the Bikita lithium mine basically allowed the women to collect a white powder that was then used for scouring, that the women used to sell at around $5 per bag. So when Sino Corporation took over, what they then did was they cut out any collection of this white dust by the women, which meant that the women could not sell, thus taking away a means of income for them. Also, there was the challenge with selective employment of women according to body types. There's actually a label, they call them Marias, because as long as a woman is petite, light-skinned, then she's likely to be employed more than a plus-size woman. Yeah. So then there's issues of pollution, water, land, and air pollution. So chemical flow and leaching into water sources has resulted in massive water pollution, meaning that there's impacts on livestock, impacts on human beings, impacts on gardening projects. It also takes us back to the issue of livelihood insecurity. There's air pollution, and there's a lot of fumes that come from the mines, and they flow directly into the homesteads. As highlighted in the previous point, unmarried and widowed women have lost their productive land, leaving them food insecure and leaving their families vulnerable. The proximity of mining operations, both artisanal and large scale, to schools has left girls vulnerable and exposed to sexual exploitation, femicide, and sexually transmitted diseases. We've also seen a high level of securitization of the mining sector, which poses a grave threat to women and girls within the community as they are exposed to arbitrary arrest and harassment when they are said to trespass into the mining property, which is not clearly demarcated to say this is where it begins and this is where it ends. So there's a strong lack for corporate social responsibility mechanisms to ensure community beneficiation, and from where we're standing, our bias is towards women. Women are not really benefiting anything from the enterprise. Next slide, please. So our conclusions and suggestions. I would like to clarify before I really get into this. I feel that in as much as we can place as much blame on the corporations, but I also feel that as a country, Zimbabwe as a country, we have so many policy loopholes and lack of policy engagement and proper systems for checks and balances that then allow certain things to happen. So it's not purely the corporate's fault, but as a nation, we also need to take responsibility. So our suggestions are that we need policy improvements to ensure gender mainstreaming is prioritized in both the operations and also during impact assessments, because women are not consulted when impact assessments are done. There is need to address mining investments and their contribution to the feminization of poverty. We need clear and concrete corporate social responsibility agreements that are gender sensitive and inclusive. We need gender sensitive concessions between corporations and host governments. And finally, we need sensitization on safeguarding of private security firms on women and girl safety. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zenzi, for your presentation, also perfect timing. Now we move to another African case study. We have a speaker. Next speaker was Itunu Grace Ishola from Nigeria. She is currently a Yenjing scholar at Yenjing Academy of Peking University, majored in politics and international relations. Her research focused on China-African cooperation in education, human capital development, and public diplomacy. So the floor is yours, Grace. You have 10 minutes.
Well, thank you. I don't think I would even need up to 10 minutes. Hello, everyone. It's nice to meet every one of us. So I'm just going to go straight into it. Thank you, Lida. Yeah, for the background of my own study, I will be talking on empowering women in Nigeria's agriculture, and I'm doing an impact access on China. Sorry, the first slide, please. Thank you. The previous slide. Thank you. Oh my God. Okay, yes, thank you. The topic slide. Okay, it's fine. We can just move on. So the background to my study is first of all, I'm looking at it from China-Africa education, agriculture renaissance, how China and Africa is cooperating in the aspect of agriculture. And Africa is a big greenhouse, looking at Nigeria, because Nigeria itself as a country is the most populous country in Africa with over 220 million people. Nigeria has over 35 million hectares of arable land, which makes it a big greenhouse in Africa. And women are frontlines in Nigeria's agriculture. Women account for about 60 to 80% of the workforce in Nigeria's agriculture, and they contribute substantially to the food production in the country. So women are frontliners in Nigeria agriculture. And looking at Nigeria, streamlining the background to Nigeria-China Agriculture Corporation itself. Nigeria-China Agriculture Corporation can be dated back to, let's say, 2003. Most importantly, like Chinese technicians came to Nigeria to pass some vocational knowledge about technology, about agriculture improvement in China. And then now we are looking at players. This study looks at players in China and Nigeria agriculture, specifically looking at aid implementers, Chinese aid implementers in Nigeria, and also agribusiness in Nigeria. So this study is specifically looking at Grain Agriculture West Africa Limited. Moving forward, I'm going to be calling it GAWAL. Thank you. So we move to the next slide. So the research question and methodology. For the research question, I addressed 3 research questions, but in this presentation, I weaved it into 2. One is, how does China and Nigeria Agriculture Corporation improve smallholders, women's rights, and gender equality in Nigeria? And the second is, how do Chinese-led agricultural training programs impacts income and livelihood of female smallholders in Nigeria? So for the second question, I would like to give a bit of an explanation, which is why fine-tuning and working on the preliminary research for the studies. I found that there are no aid projects labeled Chinese agriculture projects in Nigeria on the Chinese aid data set or the DHS or similar data set. So I started to check how does this means there's an absence of Chinese agriculture aid project or engagement in Nigeria. So, but I found that one of the most prevalent is technical and agricultural training through companies like GAWAL, and then also the Agricultural Technology Demonstration Center that was opened in Nigeria 2 years ago in 2022, December 2022. So we use a case study approach, which is the company Green Agriculture West Africa Limited, GAWAL. And then this study is purely qualitative. I did some desk research and also we used semi-structured interview. I looked at journals, media articles, books, and policy documents. Then we moved to the main findings. So for the main findings of this research, first is the challenges. What are the challenges that I found? As that there were a lack of adequate skill and machineries for women, just as Zinzile just talked about. It's not just about the Chinese engagement in the country, but on what platform are these companies or these players, on what platform are they acting? The challenges that I found in my study is that there is lack of skill and machineries, especially for women, and there's also lack of access to land and credit facilities. Like there is a gender imbalance in the way men access land and the way women have access to land. Also, there is gender segregation and consolidation of resources. Men are in charge of like the production in the agriculture. In the agriculture sector, for example, they sell like the shoots for cassava, and then women have to depend on men before they can produce. And also their gender roles and cultural norms. If we have time, we will dive deep into that. And also I looked at, for these studies, I kind of looked at two beneficiary groups. They are not just, when we looked at these trainings, we see two beneficiary groups. The first one are the one who attend the training. And there are other indirect beneficiaries. These are including household members of the people that attended the training, male or female. And they're also members of the same farmers association, friends, and their community. So this study found out that it's not just one group of people that are really benefiting from the training. We have two groups of people. We have the direct and the indirect ones. And so like the impact of this training on women, their capacity building, they're able to learn how to use equipment, modern skills, and techniques in rice cultivation, which is not like the traditional way of farming. And for livelihood and income, because these are like the things I was testing to see the impact on females, I found out that there's diversification of income through food processing and production of rice seeds, which was not there in the past, post-training. However, there's still gender imbalance in the benefits after the training for men and women that took part in this training, because the company does not have like hardcore policies to either favor women or men. It's just they depend on the ministries to get the trainees for them. And the ministries might, because of this, in rice production, they have more men than women in rice farming. So there is a possibility that there is a high chance that men are participating than women. Also, though there are benefits, like there is high yields and less labor because of the new technology of planting rice, like the new variant of rice. There is high yield, less labor, and increased income, but there's still an imbalance in how women access this opportunity and how these opportunities benefit women. And lastly, we talked about shifting culture norms. The behavioral changes that I found in this report is like the female smallholders reported that their Chinese-led agricultural training actually positively impacted them, the adoption of modern technology practices, which was not like that in the past, which is leading to like gender norms being shifted in the agriculture sector, because there were crops, rice and cassava and all the kind of crops were crops that were labeled male crops. There are less female farmers in this space, but now that women have access to this training, women plant more rice. They use larger space to plant rice, and they're also taking up leadership positions in farming association to bargain for larger lands for commercial farming and other amenities. So we go to the conclusions. So for the conclusion, this study is rather like a very small scale project, but it contributes significantly to the discourse on China's global engagement from a feminist perspective and also from a micro level analysis. The subject here talked about we tried to understand the gender dynamism of China-Nigeria Agriculture Cooperation, and also it tells the modalities of Chinese agricultural aid in Nigeria. But most importantly, it is not just about China and the country, it is, and the host countries, it's more like people-to-people relations, how the implementers of this aid and how, like, what was the people dynamics between this engagement, not just China and the country, not just government to government, but more on people-to-people relations. How do people really benefited from this, from China's engagement in their country? And also this studies show us the impact of China-Nigeria Agricultural Cooperation on female smallholder income and livelihood. So on this, I would wrap up to I propose some suggestions to help strengthen the agriculture cooperation between China and Nigeria, and how this cooperation can strengthen gender equality, because from the study, we see that there are no hardcore policies to either favor women in the design of the training program. So I would be suggesting to three parties. The first is the Nigerian policymakers to promulgate new policies to boost inclusion and sustainable agriculture development, because originally I talked about the challenges. Access to land, credit, and extension services are still lacking for women in the Nigerian space, and most of the agricultural value chain are dominated by men. So in Nigeria, the Nigerian policymaker itself has to provide policies that boost inclusion. And also gender mainstreaming in the agriculture sector is needed from the Nigerian side. To the Chinese policymaker, with respect for the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence guiding China's foreign policy and relations, I still think there is a need to create multi-layered partnership between the host country without really breaking the non-conditionality rule, to communicate their expectations and with their partners to achieve their goals. We need to put women also in the design of whatever training or whatever project that we want to do in these countries. And then lastly, to scholars, activists, and non-government organizations, there is need for data, and there's need to monitor and evaluate whatever programs we have on ground now, or the ones we would have in the future, because without data, you don't know what is working and what is not working. And lastly, there is need to sensitize the public through knowledge sharing, communication with key actors. For example, I know NGOs, some NGOs work with the Farmers Association. There is need for more communication to let them know, oh, this is what we're doing, and then how can you partner with us, and how do we hear your voice? How can you express your agencies? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace, for your presentation. We have, this is as you said, it's not big, a number of it's not a big number of the interviewees, but I think you have touched upon the very important questions here through this small scale case study. Our next speaker, now we shift from Africa to Pacific. Now our next speaker will be Patricia Pollard. She is an independent researcher from Solomon Islands. Her research focused on gender equality, women's rights, and social inclusion in the Solomon Islands. So now floor is yours, Patricia. You have 10 minutes.
I have the presentation on. Oh, sorry. All right, so my presentation is on the implications of security agreements on UN peace and security in the Solomon Islands. So this is a comparative study on the China Solomon Islands bilateral security cooperation and the Australia Solomon Islands security treaty. All right, so just to give you a little bit background of where the Solomons is, it's next to Australia. The background is important because it's where geopolitics is very much part of my presentation. So we are a bit close to Australia, and we have a country of less than 1 million people. And we have been friends, diplomatic partners with Taiwan for over 36 years, since the 80s, but we just switched to China in 2019. So that's a major change to our diplomatic relationship as a country. In terms of politics, we have unstable governments for sure, and there are major crises from 1998 to 2023, 2023. There's riots in 26, and there's riots in 2021. All these, in one way or another, linked to Chinese businesses. I mean, not the major one, but the two recent crises. So the major security issue from the 90s leads to Australia stepping in to help the Solomon Islands as a regional assistance mission to help the Solomon Islands to come out of the security issues then, and then made the security agreement with the Solomon Islands, the Australia bilateral security agreement. And just recently in 2022, Solomon Islands also have a security agreement with China. So that's why it's important to give the background. How does the country fare in terms of the security agreements? How do they affect the life of women in the Solomons? In the Solomons, there's gender disparities, but we have a Ministry of Women that looks after ministry affairs, look after women's affairs, and women has been an important part of peace and conflict resolution for our past security issues. They have been contributing to a lot of talking between warring parties and calming down situations. So women has been playing a big role there. But our women's participation in peace agreements has been, women has been relegated to the side in negotiating peace agreements. So it's a issue, or it has been always been a concern for the country. So in 2027, the Ministry of Women and with the government of Solomon Islands came up with the National Peace and Security Strategy for Women, National Peace and Security Action Plan for Women in 2017. And yeah, I think it needs a review now. And then in 2020, the Solomon Islands also have the National Security Strategy. So all two of these strategies, they point to the involvement of women in peace and in peace and security issues, peace and conflict resolutions and security issues. So we already, as a country, we have frameworks that is there to support women in peace resolutions or in security issues, to bring them to the table. So we already have frameworks there. So just coming back to just going back to my method in conducting the research. So from the background that I have given on both the security agreements, my main research question is, what does the Solomon Islands China security agreement mean for the situation of women in Solomon Islands and the role that play in peace building and security efforts in comparison to a traditional development partner like Australia, which has already have back in 2017 already created a security agreement with the Solomon Islands. And like the others, I've also taken a qualitative approach, semi-structured questions, and also desktop reviews from news articles, opinion pages, even Facebook discussion pages. This issue was emerging and is it was very popular in the past year. So there's lots of discussions going on in public forums. So that's also where I get my information from. So going on to the findings. Just on the China Solomon Islands Security Agreements and its implementation. So perceptions of the China Security Agreement. The security agreement was done in secrecy. There wasn't much to know about it before it was put out in the news and everything. So it just came out in Twitter. So the country was not quite prepared for it, but it's out there already. And the Solomon Islands government and China government alluded that this agreement is for the benefit of Solomon Islands and also the benefit of China's protection of their assets and their businesses in the Solomon Islands. Locals, however, have mixed reactions to the agreement because they don't really know for sure what the final draft of the agreement entails. And Western allies like Australia, New Zealand, USA, it started a geopolitical tussle for the region. So it's an emerging situation still as we are going. There's still a geopolitical issue going on, and there's lots of Solomon Islands has recently attracted lots of interest from the Western partners in the face of China's popularity in the Solomons now. Concerns about the China security agreements on implications on women, peace, and security. Like I've mentioned, we already have the frameworks to include women in any peace talks or any security issues, but there has never been any consultation with women in the China Solomon Islands Security Agreement. There is still no regard for women's role in peace building and conflict resolution. And with China's interest in security in Solomon Islands, Australia started to militarize Solomon Islands police again by providing guns. And that is a concern for Solomon Islands, especially women, because from their experiences during the past, ethnic unrest where guns were used on citizens. So it's a concern. And the security agreement has, at that time, and I think still going, has diverted attention from important areas of needs in the country, like unemployment, like services not reaching people, and all this. So in comparing with Australia, in terms of women, peace, and security considerations, Australia contributes the highest development aid to the Solomon Islands, and it has its second Women, Peace, and Security National Action Plan that supports its work in the region. But Australia didn't include gender consideration in the 2027 Solomon Islands Australia bilateral treaty. So there is similarity in the way that Australia and China conducts security agreements with the Solomon Islands, where there's no consideration for the frameworks that are already there to include women in security discussions or in peace resolutions. There is no involvement of women in the security agreements of both Australia and Australia and China. So that is still a concern for women's development area in this country, that while we have these new security agreements with these countries, there's no consideration for the frameworks that we already have in this area. But there are some opportunities for advancing women, peace, and security. The Solomon Islands women can hold the government of Australia, and the Chinese government, although it has no Women, Peace, and Security National Action Plan, it aligns itself to the UN resolutions on their work on women, peace, and security. And the Australia government, it has got its women, peace, and security policy. So the Solomon Islands Women's Development can hold them to account, hold the government of Solomon Islands to account, to work with the frameworks that the country already have now. And we could also work to strengthen relationship with China to enhance women's development. There's lots of needs in microcredit, in women's health, and in services accessibility and all this, that I knew if this relationship would really benefit women, that's how we should go. That's the path that we should take in this new relationship with China. And from benefiting from the geopolitical situation, the Solomon Islands can, with all this interest that we are having now from bigger countries, we could put it into use in a good way that benefits the country, instead of just passive players like the previous presenter noted. We could take advantage of the geopolitical situation to deal with the root causes of the crisis that the country have, in order to move on, and so that we don't come into security crisis all the time. And lastly, there is room for strengthening of national security policies. There is now time to see that we have these new security agreements, strengthen them, make sure that women's voice and representation is involved in these discussions, make sure women is at the table of discussions, and making sure that whatever that the security agreements brings in, for example, the guns that I previously talked about, that tighten our security policy so that whatever path that the country takes in terms of security is not detrimental to the people. It's not detrimental for women in Solomon Islands, but it protects them from dangers that comes with security issues. So I think that's opportunities for advancing of women, peace, and security. So just for wrapping up, women, when I was talking to women, some like randomly, and some women with knowledge in the area, there is no reconciliation with the Women, Peace, and Security agreements that the country has forged with major partners. But everyone raised the concerns that if anything in these security agreements that we don't know, and it affects Solomon Islands, women and children will be the most affected. But there are also these opportunities to pursue to ensure that the implementation of these security agreements does not further marginalize the most vulnerable in the country. So I think I'll wrap up there.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for your presentation, and apologize for my bad time management. We have only almost a half an hour left to commentator and discussion. So we have the first commentator in Kumi from Sri Lanka. She's my colleague in Dawn. Her focus is on the post-conflict transitions and constitution making. Kumi, the floor is yours. I will give you 5 minutes, and I will cut you off exactly on the 5 minutes. Sorry, otherwise we won't have time to discussion. Apologize again for my bad management.
That's fine. Thank you very much, Yiping. Thank you to everyone. These are really interesting studies and very critical, important at this moment. I will be commenting on the paper presented by Patricia. It raises for me many conundrums that are important to understand in the context of today's geopolitical realities, competing state and states' interventions in regional and national security, and resulting implications for peacemaking and peace building. I offer some comments on the paper. The paper broadly seeks to understand what the security agreement between China and Solomon Islands means for the situation of women in the country, and specifically for the role women play in peace building and security. The security agreement with China is discussed in conjunction with similar agreements with Australia, which is styled, of course, as a traditional development partner. The paper in its analysis concludes that both China and Australia, including other Western states allied with Australia, have critical geopolitical interests in the region, which are both economic and political in nature, and have security as a primary focus. In the context of ongoing unresolved conflict, as Patricia mentioned in the Solomon Islands, she analyzes these agreements both on development and security from the frame of a women's peace and security agenda, premised on UN Security Council Resolution 1325, as she said. I perceive the paper deals with the multiple and competing layers of security that concern the Solomon Islands, internal intrastate security, personal security for women and communities, as well as external security. Patricia contends that these geopolitical realities and competing interests offer, and this I think is a critical point, offer the Solomon Islands, and more particularly its women activists engaged in peace building, an opportunity to leverage development and security agreements made with China and Australia to further their agenda for sustainable peace for conflict resolution. She proposes they seek to do this by way of holding the states of China, Australia, and the Solomon Islands to their international commitments to the Women, Peace and Security Framework of UN Security Council's Resolution 1325. Well, this, of course, presupposes a shared understanding of the normative frameworks of the Women, Peace and Security agenda by all three states and the political will to uphold this beyond the rhetoric. We did hear her say that national action plans, for example, are inclusive, are framed in a particular way, are seemingly gender sensitive, but we of course see that this in real terms doesn't work, is not consulted, is not leveraged when security agreements in particular and possibly development agreements are also being made. So what then do we do? Now this has become a part of pinkwashing, particularly for the global south, particularly for the global north, and has been very technocratically operationalized with no consideration for the principles of human rights and humanism embodied in the resolutions for women, peace and security. Instead, the agenda has been securitized and limited to the rhetoric of national action plans, as been the case of the Solomon Islands and Australia. I would ask then that we pay attention to how we can and should reclaim and redefine the Women, Peace and Security agenda, creatively, substantively taking into account the lived realities of the people affected by conflict, in particular women. Such an agenda must understand and identify women's security, what it actually means and entails. And equally, it must give meaning to transformative and just peace and how such a peace can be achieved, particularly because we're talking of conflict situations. For instance, the security agreements discussed in Patricia's paper do not appear to me to be in any way considering of conflict resolution and the needs of peace building. In fact, the opposite is true. They appear to strengthen an authoritarian regime and increase militarization and insecurity, particularly for women, and will also help curb dissent. They may also seed new conflicts. So how would such agreements be leveraged by women in a positive manner, as Patricia proposed? How can they address development needs through bilateral agreements so that root causes of the Solomon Islands conflict can be addressed? And can the rhetoric of women, peace and security in China and Australia be taken at face value, or should it not be challenged in the context of their engagement in development and security at the national level in countries like the Solomon Islands? A moot question, of course, for me, and this is, I think, critical, is how we engage with state security and security arrangements without being complicit or co-opted. And I think this is something that we need to take into consideration. Solomon Islands women's movement, women activists need to take this into consideration, because this is not merely a presence at the table that we're talking about, but we're talking about how the design of security policy can be relevant and where women can engage with that. But if you're looking at authoritarian political structures, you're looking at militarization, you're looking at how this is how do you say this, how it is overridden by neoliberal development policies, then it becomes very important to decide how we want to engage with such discussions. Yeah.
Thank you, Kumi.
Context, I think, of transformative agendas are very important. So these are some of the brief comments I want to make on.
Thank you so much, Kumi, to provide such rich food for thought in the limited time. Now I give a floor to Professor Zhang Chuanhong for her reflection. Dr. Zhang teaches at the China Agricultural University, and she's director of the Center for International Development Cooperation Studies. Her research covers both China domestic rural transformation and international development cooperations. So the floor is yours, Dr. Zhang.
Thanks for inviting me to this extremely important webinar. I'm very much honored to be part of this team and to witness the progress of the important research. First of all, I think I just gave my overall impression on the four projects, not and topics, not to give specific comments to just one. First of all, I have to acknowledge that the gender issue related to China's global engagement has become extremely important these days, arousing interests of academics, policymakers, and even development practitioners, both within China and abroad. Chinese President Xi Jinping proposed to launch Global Women's Summit in 2015. Actually, that was the first voice from China's government to talk about, China's engage with gender issues. And also in 2020, China promised that, China would give more efforts to promote women development. When President Xi addressed his speech at the high-level meeting on the 25th anniversary of the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing. And the latest white paper on China's foreign aid, released in 2021, for the first time listed gender equality as one of the targets of China's international development cooperation. However, how to achieve gender equality through development cooperation, particularly how to guarantee that Chinese overseas projects to work toward that agenda, is still unknown to anybody. This program, I think, launched by Deng under the leadership of Yiping, is the first action that tries to explore the trajectory and, more importantly, to seek some of the solutions to solve the women development problems. The concept notes raise the four fundamental questions, which are extremely relevant, and the answers to these questions could perfectly respond to all the puzzles we are facing today. However, this is not an easy task. I like the term, put in the concept note, co-production of knowledge. To answer these questions, we need efforts, concerted efforts from Southern feminists. Not only should we co-produce the knowledge, but also to make sure the knowledge will be disseminated to all the policymakers and practitioners. Compared with 6 months ago when we were in Bangkok, I see the 4 case studies have been improved tremendously in terms of research methods, topic relevance, and structure. I agree with all the conclusions. And in the last few years, I also did some research related with gender and development cooperation in order to explore how development projects from different donors impacts gender equality differently at the local level. I compared the 8 projects from the World Bank and China in 34 African countries using the geocoded data of 8 data and Afrobarometer surveys. The results show that the World Bank projects can increase local women's awareness for gender equality, while Chinese aid project show no similar effects. The effects of the World Bank projects differ across sectors and gender. Aid going to gender-sensitive actors such as government, civil society, and education has the most significant impact on women's attitude toward gender equality, while men's attitude doesn't change much. If China wants to play a bigger role, I think this is definitely not what China's policymakers expect, I think. So this is definitely a very important issue we need to address. What I really appreciate about these 4 research projects is, the nuanced pictures they provide at the multiple realities happening on the ground. Just as Anita's research, he actually compared the 2 different projects. One is infrastructure project, industrial parks, and the other one is a hospital. We can see actually the 2 projects impacts women differently. All these researchers, research will lay good foundation for our future work. Some of the following questions, I think if we want to explore further, it will be very helpful. The first one, why? I think most of research are just focusing on what it is now, but why it's not answered. Why gender blindness was often the case in China's global engagement. What Southern partner countries expect China to do to promote equality. So we need more Southern perspective. But so far, we didn't say much, especially when we look at the research methodology. We didn't know how much people interviewed could represent the Southern perspective. Should China follow the same approach as traditional donors, or should China do it differently? Should we consider China as a single actor, or actors from China are too complicated to be defined as one? Should we also differentiate women and gender, or should we need to differentiate Southern women as well? As we all know, women vice chancellor are quite different from women in rural areas, right? I also did some case studies, like the one in Rwanda, the China's Agriculture Aid Center, demonstration center in Uganda. I can say actually this project did some very interesting work, like to train the widows, the widows left from the genocide. That project actually huge empower women and promote that gender equality. So we can say actually there are some differences. It was case by case, different case by case. We really see the complicated pictures happening on the ground. Last but not the least, as mentioned by all 4 researchers, we see the agency of partner countries as well as agency of women in the global South need to be emphasized, as it may play an extremely important role in shaping the agenda of China's engagement in their respective countries. As the largest South-South cooperation provider, China insists on the principle of demand-driven, that is, all the actions are based on the request of the local partner country. China indeed is a good and fast learner. I think with the co-production knowledge process, I'm sure the situation will be improved very soon. I just stop here due to the time limit and looking forward to more interaction.
Thank you so much, Professor Zhang. I think this project would not come to this stage without the advisor like yourself and others, and support and comprehensive contribution in terms of the framing the project, and also provide the very substantive comments on the draft. So thank you so much. Now we have a last commentator, Dr. Mariam Williams from Jamaica. Dr. Williams is managing partner of the Integrated Policy Research Institute and the senior advisor for Global Afro-Descendant Collaborative for the Climate Justice. She has written extensively on the issues of gender, climate change, financing for development, the gender and trade. She's also served on the international board of many organizations, including the INDON and the South Center and AWID. So the floor is yours, Dr. Williams.
Good afternoon, good morning, good night, everyone. We know we're in different circumstances time-wise. Thank you, John. This has been a really interesting and very timely and quite informative and nice learning for me from these 4 papers. So I want to congratulate the researchers and the design and implementation of this project. Very worthwhile. I'm going to just speak broadly on all 4 without any specificity, and then dig down a little bit to the Trinidad and Tobago one. I think for me, it's really important when I'm looking at it and I'm looking at Chinese foreign investment, that the first thing that I wanted to do was to make some distinction between foreign aid and foreign direct investment. And what are we talking about in the specificity of the case studies? Because I think they relate differently. I think if it's broadly foreign aid in terms of Chinese International Development Cooperation, CIDA, or SIDCA, as we would say, then the entities that are implementing those will most clearly follow the regulations of the Chinese of CIDA, of the Chinese CIDA, and South-South Cooperation as part of that. And I think if the entities that were considered are private Chinese capital, then they're less likely to follow the regulatory process, though they're not absent from it. And also in that context, where does the investment dollar comes from? Is it from the Chinese state or the Chinese bank, or is it from the 2 banks that have been what we call the BRIC banks, right? The AIBD and the National Development Banks. The latter 2 I have studied and looked at their gender and social dimensions, and I found that they're not significantly different than what you would find at IFC or the World Bank. So in that case, I wouldn't expect the firms to perform quite differently. So that's some of the kind of nitty-gritty things that I would like to have some ideas about who are these firms? Are they private firm? Are they using mix of financing? And who are they regulated by, and what regulations do they put in? I think that's very important, because the foreign direct investment literature, most recent paper that I've looked at, 2017 by the IMF, that looked at gender and foreign direct investment, I've pointed to two distinct outcome. One is that foreign direct investment tends to improve women's economic empowerment, but not gender inequality. So there's a positive relationship between the foreign direct investment and women's empowerment, right? But there's a negative correlation between that and gender inequality or gender equality. So that also helped me a little bit with understanding some of the outcome, especially with the Trinidadian case. And the broader framing that I started with, I really enjoyed the presentation by Grace, because I think she also talked a lot more about the framing and the precepts and condition under which Chinese foreign aid is implemented in the South, in terms of the umbrella of South-South cooperation, which is something that I'm very much familiar with, having looked at Chinese South-South cooperation on climate change and seeing how that has been implemented in developing countries, in partnership with developing countries. So I think we need to keep those in mind when we're looking at these studies. And so I rather enjoyed some of the distinctions and nuances and subtlety that was made in the latter case study from Africa. I'm less on firm ground with the Solomon Island case, so I enjoyed listening to it and look forward to delving deep into it. So I'm really looking forward to when these studies are actually purported. My second point of reference as I begin to look at it is, and in particular with regard to Trinidad and Tobago, is what is a gender landscape in Trinidad and Tobago, nationally and in respect to development cooperation issues, and specifically with respect to foreign direct investment, which is to say, how are the foreign directors invited, and what are the national legislation and conditions under which they operate? Because I think that's significant to how they unfold their program. And I think that's also in terms of what was discussed about the distinction between the industrial park, which had no consultation with women's group, and the hospital, Cuvée Hospital, which had some general, maybe one could say PR consultation that didn't actually go deep. So I think that speaks to one of the points that I heard in the last presentation on Africa about the responsibility of our national government with FDI. I think far too long our government simply thinks that inviting FDI will be the panacea to certain kinds of problem, and not realizing that you have to curate the national and the foreign direct investment. When you invite them into specific ways, and you enforce certain rules and regulation, including your gender policy. So I want to put that out as kind of my starting point. I think for private Chinese capital, for me, the main thing that I would compare it with is corporate social responsibility and the output of similar entities from developed countries who are investing in developing countries in terms of their gender implications. And as I said before, the bulk of the studies that I've been looking at says that they tend to benefit women from an empowerment because they offer jobs, they offer, in the case of the last case study from Africa, they brought some new technology and some new offerings and so forth. But in terms of impacting substantively the structure underneath the gender dimensions of the economy, they don't do so well. And they don't do so well for maybe quite obvious reason, but also because of the way that corporate social responsibility may or may not have been part of their mission and a modus operandi when they were invited to partake in the economy. Now, to go into the Trinidad example, which I really, really enjoyed, and I'm looking forward to reading more in depth. So I thank the authors for their work. And I know it's not so easy to do these granular case studies, so really appreciative of it. So I think the conceptual frameworks were of third world feminism, but I also wonder a little bit if some qualified approach to third world feminism could actually have included some of the plantation school work, and to see how, because we're a post-slave society, right? We're ex-plantation society. And not all of third world feminism relates to post-slave society or there's certain kind of things that are embedded in post-slave society or plantation economy in the Caribbean that impacts how gender and gender ideology and how gender is integrated in our region. So some of that kind of piqued my interest in terms of, how do you kind of mingle some of the plantation stuff, even though plantation school economics was not very gendered, but it does have some underlying issues around how development dependency in the Caribbean relates to the persistency of our dependence on foreign direct investment and the persistency of the way that we treat foreign direct investment in terms of kind of a la carte blanc entree without really restrictive provisioning to enforce their productivity or to enforce their social dimensions in the society. So I'm really looking forward to the industrial park. I think is pretty typical to what we've seen for many years with all the various kinds of ways that corporations have come to the developing countries to set up their industrial parks or their various kinds of operational. So not much about that was new for me, but I really, really enjoyed seeing that in the modern, because I wasn't aware of that was ongoing in Trinidad. I know that's pretty much still standard for Jamaica, but Trinidad, given its resources, I wasn't aware that it was so much linked to that. Yeah, you're gonna shut me down. So thank you. Thank you. Hopefully we can have some more discussion on it, but I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to the papers, the in-depth papers. And thank you, Dawn. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the three commentators, Kumi, Mariama, and Chuan Hong, for your thought-provoking reflection and knowledge sharing. We also like to thank all the presenters, and please join me, give a big applause to all the speakers and commentators. Now I'm opening the discussion floor. So you can raise your hands or you can just unmute yourself to speak But please be precise and ask your questions or make comments, and limit your intervention within 1 minute, so we can accommodate as many as we can in the rest of the 10 minutes. So now I open the floor. There anyone like to just speak and just raise your hands or unmute yourself and speak to the mic. It's an open mic. Or should I call your name? I know there's some of my the project advisors and the authors of other case studies also here with us. I would like to give the priority to them if they have anything they want to share or they want to add. For example, Peggy and Laura and anyone else. And Ritu, I think. If not, I would. There are several questions already collected by my colleague. So I think there's one question that directed to Zinzile about your research, the impact of Chinese involvement in mining in Africa, particularly in Zimbabwe. So you mentioned about the collaboration efforts and involve local communities, international organizations or governments to address the gender disparities and enhance workplace inclusivities within the mining industry. So how effective those collaboration efforts? If not, what's the approach that you would say that need to adopt to ensure the effectiveness of this intervention?
Thank you, Yiping. What we've done over the years is we've tried to get state actors, Chinese corporations that are working within the communities, CSOs, non-governmental organizations, and the communities themselves involved in projects, conversations, activities that will basically get people to have a certain gender awareness, to be more gender sensitive. So far, we've only had one success case, which is in Marange, where there is the diamond mining. We have seen the Chinese corporations come together and start community-based projects for women in chicken rearing, and they've basically started to develop the clinics and the schools. In the other areas, it's still a work in progress. We're still trying to work on it. But I'll say the key element to the success story that we've had has been dialogue, constant engagement, back and forth as we try to navigate both organizational, political, and social policies and the frameworks to say, how can we better women's lives? What can we do to improve the situation and to help them benefit from whatever beneficiation they can get. But the biggest challenge with Zimbabwe is we have got great policies on paper, but the implementation of the policies is very challenging. We've got a great gender policy, we've got good things on paper, but we are still engaging to say, how can we actually actualize the policies and make them work for the communities? How can we then get our investment partners to be accountable and to actually follow through on what is expected of them according to our policies? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Denny, for your reply. I just reminded by my colleague that you don't have function of unmute your mic, so you can only write your comments and questions on the chat box. So here I receive a comments and question from the Peggy, our project advisor. She was asking, she was reflecting on one of the things that is clear to her is that case studies show how little the insights, frameworks, and mechanisms of the past 40 years are reflected in the practice. Most importantly, the link to gender mainstreaming processes and involvement of women most affected by the policies in defining and monitoring the programs. In summary, women's agency must be emphasized. This is what Peggy want to share with us. So are there any reflection or the comments on this, on the Peggy's question and the reflection? So what's the past 40 years? That's a lot of effort has been put into the gender mainstreaming, the policy making and the programming, and how it seems like the China as a newcomer has not been influenced or hasn't really joined these efforts, or how this can be implemented or achieved. There's any reflection from your research that can respond to that question? This will be the last Q&A.
Okay,
Grace?
I think I'm just gonna jump on that and then just kind of give like a brief what I found out during my own study is in the last 40 years of China's engagement, or I would say from the going out policy in 2000, let's just say 20 something years now, there has to be a framework for China to follow on ground, even in the host countries. So most importantly, it's not just China gets to this place, they also want to know, for example, the company I was looking at, they, for the training, it is the ministry that they partner with that recruit the trainees. So if the ministry is recruiting less women, then it is on the ministry side. Though the company stated that, oh, we have some policies to kind of give some slots to women. However, if the partner we are working on, out of 40 participants, we only provide 3, 4, or 5 women, we still have to work with that. So sometimes it is not China not following the policy. Yes, there are times where you have to like state your expectations that this is what I want as the giving partner, or like the aid provider, or even for the FDIs, you have to state your expectation, not strictly, but stating the expectations. In the case, we see that China is not really stating its expectation, because I also checked in the literature compared to like FAO's some of the existing agriculture training that the Food and Agriculture Organization have done in Nigeria compared to like the one the Chinese organizations are running. They state that they want so amount of women in their training. They stated their expectation. So the partners can also meet up with this expectation. But if there are no expectations stated, nothing said in books, I think it will affect how like the partnership run. Also, because of the project I was looking at was on rice cultivation, which was a men-dominated field. So the partner also, most of them think, because this is a men-dominated field, we have more men practicing, more men farmers in this area. So they kind of prioritize men over women. So if you look at this dynamics, it's on the two sides. The Chinese side also have to state their expectations, why there has to also be gender mainstreaming from the host countries. Thank you.
We have a floor. We have the hand raised by Anita. You want the floor? Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Ping. And thanks for all the comments. I mean, they have been so good, and definitely food for thought for going forward, and for maybe another paper at some other time as we have come to the final part. But I wanted to just make one general comment that touches what Peggy said, as well as our colleague and friend from Jamaica, sorry, I'm not remembering the name, about, you know, evaluating Chinese development cooperation over a period of time, and a related comment, I think, on distinguishing between development cooperation and investments. I think we can bring those two together to say one of the problems or challenges that the literature has identified, and we have found out in our research, is that it's very difficult sometimes, or challenging, to separate and to distinguish between Chinese development cooperation from Chinese investment. And so in terms of really pinning them down to the impact or the implications of those projects, I think is very important when research is being conducted, or in trying to interrogate the impact, or the social impact of development cooperation. And I think also, in terms of evaluating development cooperation over the last few decades, is the issue of transparency. One of the critiques of Chinese engagement is about transparency and accountability. And I found it interesting, though, that I was able to find, I thought it would have been difficult to find the MOU online, but I did find some information online. However, of course, behind the scenes negotiations, you do not have this kind of information. But I think in terms of really evaluating and assessing and monitoring the impact implications of projects and initiatives, that the idea of transparency, that has been one of the critiques of Chinese engagement, is something that we need to continue to look at and continue to engage on as we go forward in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anita, for your response and reflection. And in the chat box, I also found Yu Yin, my co-author for the development of this analytical framework, has committed to promote more gender equality and women empowerment in the renewable energy transfer, the project that she's focusing on. And we also had a suggestion from the Magda. Hi, Magda, nice to see you here. There's a need to advocate countries invest more on women's education. So I think all these comments, questions, and also the questions raised by especially by the commentators, we always find, you know, the one good research always lead to more questions than the conclusions that we can, you know, answer. So I would like to, by concluding this webinar, I would like to thank everyone for your participation and contribution. As this case study has demonstrated, China's engagement with Global South should not be simply reinforces the donor-recipient dependent syndrome, which has traditionally plagued the Global South in development partnership. The gender equality, women's development, empowerment, other achievable goals, and should be put in high agenda in China's development cooperation with appropriate operational guidelines and adequate financial resources. And this should not be considered or regarded as a contradiction with China's non-interference and non-conditionality principles in the foreign policy and the South-South cooperation framework that China has enshrined in this international cooperation. And I think those case studies and the commentation, the comments from the experts also remind us the complicities of the China's engagement, and you know, just in terms of the financing for the development, there's a much more nuanced analysis and analysis and research should be conducted. So only in this way, reimagine a South-South relationship and meaningful transnational feminist dialogue can become possible. So I invite you all to visit Dong website and social media for the update on this project. We were going to launch all the reports, and the executive summary of the research will be available before March. And Dong will also organize the side events at the upcoming the CSW, the UN Commission on the Status of Women, in March in New York. So last but not least, let me express my big thanks and appreciation to Dong project team, project advisors, particularly the communication team here, and the secretariat who have worked time in even through the holidays to make today's webinar possible and a success. Thank you so much, and have a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. And I will see you in the other occasion along the way. Looking forward to future collaboration and partnership with all of you. So bye for now.